Oliver Tambo, 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 Tambo, Usibambu ngasiyeke, Oliver Tambo, Usibambu ngasiyeke ni, Oliver Tambo, Usibambu ngasiyeke, Oliver Tambo, Oliver Tambo, Wetambo, Maufike kayubache, Lapho siyekhona, Mahlathi, Ase Angola, Awuthatha nansi phazu, Shayubulale, zonke izi, Shaya mabhulu, Oliver Tambo, 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 Wetambo, Usibambu ngasiyeke, Oliver Tambo, Usibambu ngasiyeke ni, Oliver Tambo, Usibambu ngasiyeke, Oliver Tambo, Oliver Tambo, Wetambo, Maufike kayubache, Lapho siyekhona, Mahlathi, Ase Angola, Awuthatha nansi phazu, Shayubulale, zonke izi, Shaya mabhulu,
Oliver Tambo, bambi isandla sami. Oliver Tambo, hold my hand. Tambo is the longest serving president of the African National Congress. Oliver Tambo, hold my hand, is a soul and song that invokes the spirit of the departed comrades who gave their lives for the freedom of South Africa. Oh, Oliver Tambo, Oliver Tambo, hold my hand, was a song sung when missions were to be executed against the brutal system of the white supremacy, system of oppression, exploitation, and apartheid. The missions included Umponto Wesizwe, the spear of the nation, coming into hit targets by those already in the country to the assignment. It became a song for the underground operatives, those in prison. This is a song of the African National Congress. This is a song which gives courage, a song of determination, a song of a resolve to discharge. And yes, this is a song for for unity in action. Oliver Tambo Bambisanda Sam, forward to the African National Congress decisive victory in the elections. Amanda!
Tambo, Oliver Tambo, Oliver Tambo, Oliver Tambo, Oliver Tambo, Oliver Tambo, Oliver Tambo. Siyege Oliver Tambo Sibambo Masiyege Oliver Tambo Sibambo Masiyege Oliver Tambo.
Ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends of the OR Tambo School of Leadership, welcome to the OR Tambo School of Leadership Public Dialogues. Today we are going to have a very interesting discussion which seeks to assess the state of our democracy by having a deeper reflection and an assessment of the electoral outcomes of the latest national and provincial elections. We'd all know that those elections have ushered in a historic development in the course of our politics. And today we thought it is important that we should have a deeper reflection of the elections so that we are able to make sense of the realities that we find ourselves right now. And this is very important because if we don't do that assessment, we may very well find ourselves in a position where we fail to make sense of what those elections are actually telling us. So it's important, really, comrades, that we do this assessment. And today we'll be joined by two gentlemen who will be assisting us to actually make sense of these elections in detail, so that whatever inference that we make it from an informed perspective. Is not guesswork, you know. We really get informed about what are these elections telling us. So today we'll be joined, comrades, by Dr. John Ostrick, as well as Professor Mandla Radebe, who will be assisting us to make sense of these elections in detail, so that we are able to then be able to ensure that whatever that we do it from an informed point, rather than really not knowing what these elections are telling us and doing guesswork. So without any waste of time, comrades, I'm going to introduce Dr. John Ostrick, who's going to be the first one to give us his presentation on this important matter that we are discussing today. We are also live on YouTube, and we welcome comrades that are joining us on YouTube to share this discussion with us. You are also welcome, comrades who are joining on YouTube, to actually pose your questions and comments during the discussion. So without any further ado, comrades, I'm going to introduce Dr. John Ostrick. Dr. John Ostrick is a PhD in philosophy of science, dealing with Bayes' theorem. He's also a trained high school science and mathematics teacher. His primary career trajectory has been in the information and communication technologies, that's ICTs. He used his knowledge in ICT and education to support the Department of Basic Education's Operation Pakisa ITC initiative, as well as serving as the Chief Information Officer for the State Capture Commission under the Department of Justice. Prior to that, he was an ICT technician at Wits University's Computer Science Department. Dr. Ostrick is he has published 8 academic papers and a number of books. He's currently researching the phenomenon of fake news and how to use LLMs for research. So without any further ado, comrades, I'm going to invite Dr. John Ostrick to give us his input. Dr. John, the floor is yours.
Amandla, comrades, can you all hear me?
Yes, we are able to hear you.
Okay, great, because sometimes the audio is not so good. All right, so I'm going to share a presentation I've prepared on this matter. Can you see that? Comrade Kafense, can you see this?
Yes, it's visible. Can you just
Okay,
put
sure.
it in slideshow mode?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. All right, so I've divided this presentation into three parts, basically the results, an analysis, and some recommendations. The results section is quite detailed. I've got quite a lot of information here. And then the analysis, I'm going to give a very brief analysis because I don't think I have all the answers here. And then recommendations, that's where I think there'll be some discussion. So the statistics that we've seen, this graph here is a graph that I produced in 2021, where I looked at the historical election results, and I made a projection that the next election would hit 40% for the ANC. And unfortunately, as we see, it turned out to be true. And it's a straightforward extrapolation. If you look at the previous election results, you can see the graph line goes directly downwards to 40. So it actually wasn't surprising for me at all. And in fact, when I posted this graph before the election, people were shooting me down and saying, no, it's not going to be that bad. And yes, it was that bad. So I think we need to pay attention to data science and how it can tell us things. So here are the results as we know. I'll get back to these figures in the analysis where you will see what these mean and what the different scenarios that can play out entail. All right, so if we look at this map of the electoral results, as you know, yellow is DA, green is ANC, and pink is IFP, and magenta, which is the dark pink, is MK. PA is the dark blue. So if you look at this map of South Africa very briefly, you can see that the DA is concentrated towards Cape Town and fades away from Cape Town. But wherever there's cities or predominantly white-owned land, you'll see it's yellow, and vice versa for the green. And then you'll notice in this picture that KZN is mostly pink and magenta, except you'll see that the bottom of KZN, it's got some green, which goes into the Eastern Cape, and then in the north of KZN, it's got some magenta that goes into Mpumalanga. And that obviously reflects the positioning of Sisulu speakers. Right, so this is the voter turnout. Now, this is an interesting graph because if we skip back to the results that I predicted, they look very similar. And I'm going to overlay them shortly. Right, you overlay them and you can see there's the election results and there's the voter turnout. What this means, I'll discuss a bit further. Right, and then on the issue of demographics, so this is a sample of Joburg's demographics from Stats SA. And you'll see that if you look at the suburbs, it's mostly white people. You can see their suburbs. CBD is mostly black people, and then the same for Soweto. And then in between, you'll see there's obviously so-called colored and Indian areas. And now, obviously, this is quite this does show some racial mixing, but however, the dominance is quite clear that it's still mostly white people in the north and mostly black people in the south. Now, why is this interesting? Well, if we skip forward to the electoral results map, and then we overlay the two, it's the same map again. So we see that effectively, if you look at the north of Joburg, where the suburbs are, where it says JHB, that is white people voting for DA. And then in the South Soweto, we see the South is black dominated and ANC dominated. Interestingly, in the CBD, we see it's red. In other words, it looks like people in the CBD voted EFF. Right, so overlay those two, and you can see there clearly where there are predominantly black people in the CBD, it's EFF, but elsewhere it's ANC. Right, so now let's look at KZN in a bit more detail. So here we've got magenta, which is the dark pink, and that is MK, and then light pink is the IFP. And then if you look at this map, you'll see that where there is yellow, that's roughly where there's white-dominated cities, and where there is green, it's ANC, and you'll see that the ANC tends to be next to the yellow of the DA. So what this means is if you look at that area, you'll see that on the map of a city, you'll see where the city is positioned. The city will be positioned where the yellow is, and then obviously the adjacent township is green, ANC. So again, black and white, you people are voting by race. But there's a bit more nuance here because obviously there's the pink and magenta as well. So here's a map of the towns in KZN, and you go back to the map and you'll see the green, the yellow that cuts diagonally across KZN corresponds to the motorway with the white-dominated towns, and then the coast, particularly the south coast, where you've got those yellow patches of the DA that corresponds to, again, white-dominated towns. We'll overlay the two maps, and you see that's correct. So what this is telling us is white people mostly live in the cities, they vote DA, and vice versa. And then if we compare this to the map of the Ingonyama Trust, which is obviously your traditional lands, those correspond roughly to IFP. So if we overlay IFP and Ingonyama Trust, we see that there is a difference here, but I mean, you can see mostly most of the IFP lands are inside Ingonyama Trust land. So this suggests that there's quite a strong element of traditionalism of the people who vote IFP. This is a response I saw today from the so-called markets. This is from Seeking Alpha, which is a well-known stock trader website. And you'll see that they say, in the most recent election, ANC, which has been in power for whatever, finally faced rebuke, earning less than a simple majority. The election result is to us, meaning the markets, a sign the country's begun to acknowledge problems with the top political party. I wonder what they mean by those problems. In other words, this is a very good sign. So they're saying that it's good that the ANC has lost power. And then they carry on. In most developed markets, national politics has a small impact on equity returns. But in a less developed country like South Africa, reliable public services and rule of law shouldn't be taken for granted. So they're basically implying that the ANC is not good for service or rule of law. So we can see this as they say here, it's a huge step in the right direction to make the country more investable. So you can see that the so-called markets, in other words, Wall Street, basically are happy to see the ANC having lost some power. So here's the analysis of all these graphs and data that I've looked at. We can see that the turnout in part causes the decline. So if we look at go back to the graph of turnout versus voting results, we can see that it's roughly the same graph. And that shows that to a large extent, the reason we lost so much power is actually just because people didn't bother to come and vote. We've also seen that people vote by race because we can see a strong correlation between suburban areas which are white dominated, township areas which are black dominated, and ANC versus DA kind of voting patterns. And then in the case of KZN, we see that MK and IFP mostly got traditional and rural areas, whereas ANC and DA got mostly towns and townships. So in my view, it looks like that the reason MK was suddenly so successful and getting much more of the vote than, say, something much more established like EFF is simply because of the Jay-Z factor, right? So former President Comrade Jay-Z taking over the leadership of that party was a strategic move that let him effectively take control of KZN. People didn't really change their vote from ANC to anything else except MK. So if we look at the results and we add MK's share to the ANC results, so the 2019 result was 57%. But if we add MK and ANC from this year, we get 55%, which suggests that we only lost 2% to the disgruntled vote faction, but we lost a huge percentage to Jay-Z. So why is this the lowest turnout? Why do people still vote by race and area in 2024? Why do people vote for Jay-Z? And why are the markets rejoicing? Those are the 4 questions I want to address briefly. And here are the answers. So the first answer is that I think the triple challenges are preventing people from seeing meaningful change in their life. So people basically can't justify the cost of travel and time to go to a voting station if they don't see that it's going to help them in their daily life. So we and others keep promising jobs, and we don't really deliver. The oldest person who remembers apartheid is now about 23. So, and 45% of that age group are unemployed. So now, why should those people care to vote for us if A, they never knew how bad apartheid was, and B, they're unemployed, right? So you think about a person in that age group who never saw apartheid, never saw the horrors of it, and we now expect them to come to a voting booth and vote for us. Why? We've given them nothing as far as they're concerned. So it doesn't surprise me that the youth don't show up and don't vote. So the voting population declining is not so much people not showing up. I think it's a large proportion to do with people simply dying of old age or moving to other countries or things like that. Second reason, why do people follow voting by race? And my answer is I think people are still racist. So here's a classic sample from Raghadi Zilla, where she's saying that the apartheid state had effective, capable cadre deployment. Charming. Anyway, she said that on the 18th of January, 2 years ago. Yeah, so that's why people still vote for her, because they agree with her. Right, then the support for Jay-Z is the thing that I think we need to understand. We see that the rural and Ingonyama trust lands correlate with MK and IFP respectively, but only loosely. So it's not exact, but it's pretty strong correlation. And we see that towns in KZN are either DA or ANC, depending on demographics. Again, a racial bias in the voting patterns. And then the third point that interests me is that apparently Zondo did not tarnish former President Comrade Jay-Z's image in KZN. So the question is, why did that not happen? And we saw when he got arrested for contempt of court, right? We had all those riots July 9th, 2021. And we see there was a response to his being arrested, and they were triggered by that. So we didn't take that as a warning, and we should have taken that as a warning when we saw the level of support that Comrade Jay-Z had. So the question for me is, why does he have that much support given what he's accused of at Zondo? Does it mean that in KZN corruption is not perceived as a big problem? Does it mean that his treatment you remember the infamous shower case, is that not perceived as a problem? And I think not. I think that's probably what we're not understanding is why that's not taken seriously, why it's not treated as a problem. And we need to understand that. So my recommendations follow. The first and most important recommendation is that we need to create jobs, and we need to discuss that. How did that missing 40% of voters disappear? I think it's got to do with jobs. And I think if we could get those 40% back into the ANC voting pool, we would be pushed up to near 80% of the vote. We would never lose power if we could get those people on board. The second thing we need to do is we need to understand the racial bias in voting. All right, so we've seen some Black people vote for ANC, and we've DA, and we've seen a large proportion of the colored population voting DA. We need to understand that. Why do certain groups and people who are mostly affluent vote DA? What is it about the DA that appeals to their thought processes? Is it just racism on the part of the white compatriots, or is it more complicated? Has it got to do with, say, individualism, or has it got to do with capitalism? These are various hypotheses we could come up with for why people would vote DA. So we need to engage constructively with the DA and not the DA so much, the DA supporters, and find out why they want to vote for an overtly racist party. And if we could onboard that group, we would then be heading towards 50% or 60%. But we'd need to obviously change their attitudes and views on things. Third point of the recommendations, we need to understand the support for Comrade Jay-Z in a non-bigoted manner. In other words, we need to understand what the voters see in him. Is it his leadership style? Is it his personality? What is it about Jay-Z that attracts an entire province? And how is the factionalism around him destroying the ANC, and what can we do about that? Is there a way to engage with him and or MK in a constructive way that doesn't involve onboarding some of their, shall we say, more controversial positions like anti-constitutionalism? So if we could succeed in getting those voters back, we'd have 55% of the vote. In other words, we'd be back roughly where we were in 2019. So if we look at the above recommendations coldly, it seems that the most powerful route is actually the jobs gains route. So we could actually omit dealing with our political opponents constructively if we could actually create jobs. However, I think there is benefit to engaging constructively with political opponents. On the question of the markets, it's clearly a response that that the Wall Street and similar think that a greater presence of DA, in other words, white politicians in government, would mean something more like a more investor-friendly policy of our government. And because we're short of job creation, I think it should be something that we should be positive about, in the sense that we should think of this as an opportunity to try and attract these investors while they're still expecting to see more white people, and say to them, look, please come and invest here, but bring job creating type investments. Don't just come here and buy bonds and stocks and mortgages. Rather, just come here and put up factories and similar. So we need to take the opportunity while the market is positive towards us to try and create more jobs locally, because for me, that's the most important thing. Fighting the battle of global socialism versus capitalism isn't something we're going to win like in this next 5 years. So I think we should focus on that. So those roughly are my recommendations and thoughts on this data and what it means. And yeah, I think it's pretty clear if you look at these results, what it means. So here we can see very clearly that Comrade Jay-Z took an entire province from us. And here we can see very clearly that the voter turnout is what knocked us over. So yeah, hence my recommendations. Engage the political opponents, try create jobs, and let's actually deliver something for the citizens so that they vote for us again. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for that detailed assessment of the outcomes. I think you've done a great job that has actually started to pose questions of interest that we really need to start taking into consideration. I like your recommendations. I think those are things that we really need to take to heart to ensure that we can ensure that we start getting that lost support and regain that lost ground. It's very important to take some of those considerations to heart. So without any further ado, comrades, I'm going to invite Professor Mandla Radebe to give us his presentation, and then from there we can then start to have a discussion around these matters that they've presented. So I will read Dr. Mandla's, or Professor Mandla. I was cautioned sometime last year that there's a difference between a doctor and a professor. So you need to be careful when you use people's title to use them correctly. So it's Professor Mandla Radebe. His qualifications include a PhD in media studies from the University of Witwatersrand, a master's in journalism and media studies from Wits University, BA honors journalism and media studies from Wits, and a BSc degree in computer and information technology from Vista University, Soweto campus. You remember Vista is actually the University of Johannesburg, and Professor Mandla Debe is an associate professor in the Department of Strategic Communication and the director of the Center of Data and Digital Communications in the School of Communication at the University of Johannesburg, with a professional tenure spanning over 2 decades. He has extensive experience across diverse industries, including accounting and auditing, financial services, information and communication technology, higher education, retail, and the public sector. Professor Mandla has actively contributed to numerous policy formulation and development initiatives throughout his career. And he's also currently the chairperson of the South African Communist Party in Gauteng. He has a very illustrious bio. He has also contributed to a number of books, including the book that he authored on Comrade Mzala Nxumalo. And I could go on and on and on and on. So without any further ado, Prof. Mandla, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I hope you can hear me. And let me take this opportunity to greet everyone who's in the house. And thank you very much, Comrade John, for a very... I hope I'm unmuted now.
Yes, Prof. You
We can hear you, Prof.
unmuted.
Okay, and I hope that the presentation that Comrade John has done, it will lay the basis for us for engaging. So I will not repeat some of the things that he has said that are very important, but let me just go to the overview of this presentation, which I think is very important for our discussion this afternoon, to appreciate that our young democracy, which was attained following the 1994 democratic breakthrough, in my view, has demonstrated significant signs of resilience over the past decades. Comrades will recall that elections have been largely peaceful, of course, notwithstanding the challenges that we've had, especially in the early 90s. But you will recall that, for example, the ANC lost the first election in KZN. It later on lost the Western Cape province. It lost the Cape Metro, and it lost a number of metros. And the transition during that process had been very peaceful. And the recent decline to below 50% demonstrated the ANC's commitment to ensure that there is a peaceful process, so that we can celebrate as part of our democracy. But also our democracy has demonstrated high levels of plurality, as manifested by about 70 political parties that participated in these elections, and the number of independent candidates that were part of the elections. But of course, the important point that Comrade John raises on the recent national and provincial election is the experience of the lowest voter turnout. And this is, in my view, a challenge for our democracy. But to understand this, I think it is important that we have to locate the state of democracy in South Africa in analyzing the electoral process in the context of our historical context of colonialism and apartheid. Then the 1962 program of the South African Communist Party, the South African Road to Freedom, put forward a very fascinating thesis of the colonialism of a special type, which basically recognizes the existence of the oppressor white minority that occupy the same territory as the oppressed majority. And I think if you look at the presentation that Comrade John was doing, it's a manifestation of that legacy. And therefore, the legacy of the CST persists, and the scars of that legacy are still deeply ingrained in our society, as manifested either through the spatial planning, discrimination, and high levels of inequality. In the context of that, and how the oppressed majority responded, that must also be located in the context of the National Democratic Revolution, which was later on buttressed by the Freedom Charter as a framework towards socio-economic and political transformation in our country. The ANC-headed movement recognized that the motive force of the National Democratic Revolution was the working class. But when you look at the problems that are being presented, where there's high levels of unemployment, inequality, it is the working class that is at the receiving end of the legacy of the CST. So that is also very important as part of our background. And when we take into account the 1994 democratic breakthrough, from a Marxist point of view, we can then argue that it led to the establishment of a bourgeois democratic state where the political and the economic power remains interlinked with the ruling capitalist class, which then influences and shapes the policies that maintains dominance post this situation. These are the present day facts that Comrade John was reflecting on in the context of the lower voter turnout, but also the racialized voter behavior and voter patterns in our country. Out of the 58.5%, or the white areas significantly demonstrate that there was high levels of 71%. The Indian communities at 64%, the colored communities at 58%, and the African communities at 55%. This disparity of voter participation had a clear impact on the election outcome, with the strongholds of the ANC experiencing low voter turnout. Is a point that I will not belabor, because I think Comrade John has reflected on. These are the slides that I found very exciting, that were done by Davy Schlotz, who writes for that publication. But if you look at I'm putting them up because I think they help us to reflect very clearly, emphasize the point that Comrade John was raising, that if you look at the white population in their areas, their turnout in 2019 as opposed to 2024, in 2024, 71%, Indians, 64%, is a point that I've mentioned previously, which then gave us the 58%. But here is for me, the point that I think we must emphasize, building on what Comrade John was saying, that if you look at the Black electorate voting patterns, let's look at the Africans in particular. If you look at the Africans, you can see that the ANC declined from 73% in its strongholds to 53%. And of course, if you look at, there's an emergence of MK Party as a new kid in the block, and you can see that the Patriotic Alliance does not remain a factor in these communities. If you look at the Indian communities, the DA sort of consolidates a stronghold, but the emergence of the MK Party halves the ANC's support. If you look at the colored communities, the DA is sort of affected by the emergence of the PA, in a sense. Actually, even the ANC is affected by that, because it also goes a little bit down. So the emergence of the PA in the colored communities largely affected the DA. But look at the white electorate voting patterns, which is very interesting in my view. Suddenly you see that again, in white areas, it consolidates, but the ANC goes down. If you look at the Afrikaner areas, again, the DA sort of grows, which is a strategy that Helen Zille had put in place to reclaim their DA from Black people, basically. And you can see they ditched Freedom Front, went back to the DA. I mean, the Freedom Front suffered. The ANC slightly low in that areas. The opposition parties in South Africa, basically the fact of the matter, to the point that Comrade John was raising, is that DA sort of has consolidated its base, but has remained stagnant. The rise of ethno-nationalism and narrow-nationalism in the context of Patriotic Alliance, MK Party, Action XA, those parties is one of the things that we're beginning to observe. I'm going to come to this point later on. So it is very clear that building a cohesive and a credible alternative to the ANC is not an easy thing to do. And actually, all opposition parties have tried, and all of them are struggling to present a cogent alternative towards the ANC. It's a point that I think we need to take seriously in our discussions. But so I think those are some of the things that are important. But let's come to my argument on the case of ethno-nationalism. There is a study that we're currently doing, and I'm just going to give you some feelers on. We're looking at some areas to track the growth of the MK Party. If you look at these are some of the Gauteng, Johannesburg-based hostel voting districts. I'm just picking 3 from the study to demonstrate my point, that if you look at Dube Hostel, this hostel as a VD, this VD has historically been won by IFP. In 2019, the IFP still won it. The ANC had a little bit of an entry point, and the NFP had always had a presence. Look at in 2024 is won by the IFP. Look at GP Hostel, the same pattern repeats itself. The IFP suddenly is losing this VD for the first time. Same as Nansfield Hostel. This pattern repeats itself largely where there is a majority of Zulu-speaking voters. So the fact of the matter is that voting patterns follows a language is important. And therefore, in these elections, the case of ethno-nationalism is a case that we need to discuss, distill in a very nuanced, particular way. But look at this slide for Patriotic Alliance. Another case of clear ethno-nationalist type of voting. In Cape Town, strangely, the DA has been able to maintain a strong hold, but nationally, the Patriotic Alliance is pushing is affecting the DA's dominance in the colored community. So ethno-nationalism is very important. The factors that Corporate Join has raised are very important if we were to understand the decline and if we were to reverse the decline. The ANC decline can be attributed to the failure to address the persistent socio-economic issues such as poverty, inequality, and unemployment that have plagued South Africans. And it is these factors that have eroded the public trust in the governing party. The ANC's embrace of neoliberal economic policies and austerity measures has also contributed to its decline, as these policies has clearly demonstrated they failed to deliver meaningful improvements in the lives of the majority of South Africans, the working class in particular. The reported widespread corruption within government is another factor that has led to the erosion of trust within the party and the party's inability to address some of these problems. But of course, if we were to begin to understand the way forward, you cannot analyze these elections outside of the class structure of our society, because elections serve as a reflection of the underlying classes within society that reveals that there are competing interests and power dynamics between the working class and the bourgeoisie and other social strata in society. That is very important, in my view, if we were to analyze these elections. So the policies and the candidates that gain tractions, what are the messages that they're saying, and what hope are they giving to the working class? Some of the important points that we must take into account. So the class structure of our society remains important, but the critical points, Comrade John says the market. I say the capital, the role of capital in our elections, in our democracy is very important, and the point that we must debate, because capital plays a significant role in South Africa's elections through substantial financial contribution to political parties. There's a party that got, millions and millions of rent only to get 2 seats. So wealthy individuals and corporations have continued to donate to political parties to influence policies and priorities. The media ownership, I'm going to come to this point later on, plays a very significant role. It's linked to the role of capital. We know that lobbying and advocates, for example, Business Unity South Africa has been very vocal in expressing its desired outcome of the elections. And when the elections were out, it pushed very hard for a DA-ANC coalition. So those are some of the things that happens. Capital exerts pressure on political parties because they leverage on the stability of the economy and investment. The investment struck in South Africa and the stagnant economy as a result has threatened the ANC's hegemony, and it is precisely that has led to the decline. So the threats to disinvest, economic disruption, we all know that can largely influence political decisions and how the electorates vote. So the control of economic resources is very important in analyzing the elections. Let me just quickly come back to this point on media, because I think it is important that the role of both the traditional but also as the new digital media in shaping the perception can never be overstated. The mainstream and social media outlets have played a significant role in ensuring that the political views and the events of candidates are shaped in a particular way. If you listen to most radio stations in the morning, especially those in Gauteng, you have got absolutely no doubt that they did not prefer the ANC to win. So the proliferation of disinformation and misinformation further complicates the landscape. So, and the fact of the matter is that the revolutions globally have, both in the past and present, have always appreciated the crucial role of the battle of ideas. And I think that the dissemination of information by the media is not just the only reason, but the media is very central in how it constructs hegemony on behalf of capital in particular. And this is what we need to begin to appreciate if we are to analyze the elections. So the absence of the control of influence of the platforms of battle of ideas, I think, have grossly affected the ANC. Towards the end, Comrade Chairperson, the prospects of democracy and the revolutionary change, there are strengths that we need to appreciate that I've already highlighted, that despite all this, some of these challenges, I think there's a future for our democracy, because we still have the vast majority of South Africans participating in the elections. But of course, the challenges of high, low voter turnout, have got a serious potential of affecting our democracy. And because what it can do, it can also lead to the rise of populist and anti-democratic and narrow nationalist parties, as we have observed in the past few years or so. So we need to restore faith in the democratic system for long-term sustainability. But how you do that? You do some of the things that Comrade John was presenting. But here are some are my views on how we can build, defend, and entrench democracy as a basis of entrenching the national democratic revolution. The importance of grassroots organizing cannot be overemphasized. Engaging with local communities, involving local leadership, establishing committees. What happened to the street committees, for example, there's a basic form of mobilization. How do we train local leaders? Political education is also important. How do we ensure that we go back to the basis in ensuring that there is experts, then experienced activists that will come to the grassroots level to drive serious political education, but also taking advantage of the digital media platforms that exist. Mass mobilization, there are ongoing popular struggles that found expression in all our communities. And if the ANC is not going to locate itself in those popular struggles and even lead them, it will not be able to reposition itself as a leader of society, because with 40%, the concept of the leader of society begins to be questioned. So these are the views, Comrade Chair, that I think can help us to lay the basics for a foundation that we need to correctly analyze the elections as Comrade John has led us, if we are to fashion the way forward. Let me pause here, and very happy to engage with comrades, and I hope I was clear, Comrade Chairperson. Thank you very much.
Prof. Manda, thank you so much for that presentation. If I was to be Sangomic, I would say actually you and Dr. John sat together in preparing your presentations because one was more focused on the quantitative aspects of the election results, of course, with some qualitative inputs, but I think yours coming in with a class analysis of where we find ourselves and being more qualitative actually complements the first presentation. And I think you and Dr. John have laid a great basis for a discussion. So the rules of engagements for those that are new to this platform are very simple. As we are about to enter into the discussion session, is that you must make sure that your gadget or your profile is named properly. And then when you ask questions, please let us not preamble. Let us make those points as succinct and as concise as we possibly can, so that we can allow time for more discussions. The presentations were really just to, give us a basis upon which we should discuss. So I'll note hands and I'll go with the rounds of 5 and then give it back to my panelists to respond. I see the first hand is Hope Babo. And thank you for joining us, Comrade Hope. Any other hand, comrades? I want to note the first 5 hands and then we'll allow our guests to respond to those questions and comments. Please raise your hands, comrades. Okay, I see comrades. I don't know if they are struggling to raise hands, but this is unlike the platform. So, Comrade Hope, I'll allow you to ask your questions, and maybe comrades then will, be inspired. Oh, I see the second hand, Comrade JJ. So I'll just allow Comrade Hope to go ahead, and then if you feel inspired, you can raise your hands. We'll note them. Comrade Hope, the floor is yours. Comrade Hope, please unmute.
I think the host must unmute.
I've asked him to unmute, but unfortunately, I don't know why is he struggling to unmute. Comrade Hope Papo, please unmute. Seemingly, Comrade Hope is struggling. Let's go to Comrade JJ.
Thank you, comrade. Good morning to everybody, all the comrades that are present on the platform. Mine, it's not necessarily a question, but short remarks, which may not take 2 to 3 minutes. Let me start by appreciating the presentation. They are very much enlightening indeed, and I would like to receive the presentations, although Comrade John has indicated where we can get his. And I think we'll get the other one from Comrade Kader. Mine is just to understand the issues and the impact of the MK. Because from where I stand, the MK and all other incidences that took place in relation to Comrade JZ, it's not necessarily organizational issues. They have to do with individual issues. The fight that is waging against the president. We can start from the Pala story, which is a book, as far as I'm concerned, by James Hadley Chase, The Whiff of Money, and they've written that story based on that. And to back up my argument, I also indicated this to the Hawks to say, you need to have this theory to get to the resolution of this issue. So all those are focused on individual problems rather than organizational. And I see we may want to deal with them in terms of dealing with organizational problems, and they are not. It's individual issues. And if they are treated like that, it's then that we can get the resolution to them. The issue of job creation, which may be blamed to the ANC because we have been in power for how many years? I think it's 25 years, not 30. The 30 years, it's a narrative that will allow to go on and on and on, and it's not. It's around 25 years or 20 years that we have been in power. The job creation issues, we must ask ourselves, where were our people getting jobs? They were getting jobs from those who were in charge of firms, companies, and all those. And many of those firms were there in other areas in the Bantustans, but they were not owned by Africans. They were owned by those who had money, who happened to be whites. And as we move politically and economically, they squeezed us by withdrawing. Yes, we have tried to bring about the implementation of the policy of BEE. But we can ask ourselves, where are those beneficiaries now? Because those are the people who were supposed to have filled the gaps to get us going in terms of job creation, rather than them getting what they get and sit back. And then the problem of job creations falls on the shoulders of the organization. And I think we need also to look into those and how do we deal with them moving forward. The presentation, as I've indicated, they are more enlightening, and some of us will still go deeper into them. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Comrade JJ. Let's try Comrade Hope Papo again. Comrade Hope Papo, please unmute and go ahead and ask your question. Comrade Hope Papo, if you are struggling
he says
with
he says he can't unmute. It's in the chat.
He says he can't unmute. Okay, let's do this. Please try again, Comrade Hope Papo. I suspect something is wrong with his gadget because I've just made him co-host so that he can unmute himself. Maybe you can pose that question, Comrade Hope, in the chat group, and then I'll read it out because I really don't understand why you can't unmute. Comrade Dinga, please unmute and ask your question.
Hi, comrades. Good afternoon, everyone. I just got two small questions, but before then, let me thank Comrade John and Comrade Mandla. My question is linked to how we do this analysis of elections and for suggestions of how to deepen it. Yes, I do appreciate that race, language are still factors that influence how people vote. But I'm more interested in what this says, as I think Comrade Mandla was saying, what this says about the class structure of South African society. And I am more interested on how we can do this. and here are my questions about how classes have spoken in these elections. I'm interested in how the African working class, particularly the organized sections, have voted. Now, in local government election, we normally use metros as a sign for the working class. And previously, we've spoken about how, for instance, the loss of the metros is a sign of how the sort of African working class is either teaching or is about to teach the ANC. So I'm interested in how we try and find out how the African working class and its organized sections have voted, and methodologically, how do we do that? The second important matter in society have voted is the African middle class, and if you look at it, Comrade Mandla, the Davis Scholes slides and sort of article looks at what is called sort of white designated constituencies. Basically, these are suburbs. And if you take like a suburb where I live in 2019, the vote of the ANC in some of the suburbs, historically white, was higher, and now it's lower. Can we, for instance, say that the African middle class professional layers that have moved into the suburbs are moving away from the ANC? And what does it say about the class character of the ANC? So I'm not saying you must answer it. I'm interested also how methodologically we unearth the information in the election results to be able to do some class analysis. The last question that I have, another small one, is that, I mean, as a pensioner and a retired trade unionist, most of the time I'm at home and listening to radio. And Comrade Mandla, you are right. The question of the media is an important one. But what I've found is that there is a world that is being created, which is done through social media, and people come onto radio station or participate in discourses, and you will not be able to change them. And I am interested about what do we do about the fact that the world that some of us live in is different to the world outlooks that are being created by social media, TikToks, and which seem to make meaning to some people, and it's making them unchanging about how they look at things. It doesn't matter how much facts people receive. It doesn't matter how much is presented. There is just this world in which they live in. And what can we do about that world that seem to be very persistent? Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Comrade Dinga. Comrade Hope Makwena Papo, please try to unmute. I hope this time will succeed. Yes. You can go ahead, Comrade Hope.
Yes, I think it was saying the host was not allowing me to unmute. I have changed the gadget to my phone. I think I've unmuted, and I hope I'm clear now.
You are very loud and clear, and apologies for that. I tried to make you co-host. I don't know what must have happened with the previous gadget, but you can go ahead.
Yeah. It's okay. So I'm quite familiar with the virtual platform. As I said on the other message, the first thing is that Comrade Johnson says we should use statistics and information progressively, and that brings me to a problem where people want to do election work without using a voter's roll. That should be banned in election work. You can't do election work without using a voter's roll. First of all, your interaction with the community is a bit weird. You're asking people who's registered in a home when there's a voter's roll. It just shows how that creates a problem, because a governing party, a huge organization like the ANC, cannot use outdated methods of organizing. So voters' roll and the information which has been provided, which is there in the public, should be coupled to come to the point which Comrade Mandla raised: building organization at street level, block level, voting district level, and a ward. You can't only end at the ward. It has to go to a block. It has to go to, as a voting district, it must go to a block and a street. There has to be presence of the democratic movement at street level to be able to deal with the day-to-day problems of residents. You can't have a water pipe running for a month and nobody does anything at the street level and expect that when you campaign, the same community will have the same attitude. Secondly is the issue which I want the two speakers to explain. You have a situation where at tertiary level, the bulk of the beneficiaries of TVETs and universities are NSFAS recipients. But you have 10%, 20% voter turnout at universities for issues which are relating to students, faculty issues, residence issues, and so on. Now, if somebody is not even interested to vote for an SRC or a faculty rep or a class rep, how does that person now vote for country? And I think the issue of level of organization, and I'm not talking about PYA, general level of organization and level of consciousness at TVETs and universities must be put under a microscope. Because in the past, there used to be 50%, 60% turnouts. That is before 1994, at least between 30 and 60% turnouts at those institutions for SRC elections. Now, I want to argue that it's not possible to can have a turnout there for national and provincial elections when the level of consciousness is not even proper, is not developed to a point for people to appreciate a residence committee, a faculty board, a departmental committee to be voted for. Those are organs in the institutions of higher learning, which students must participate in. And they don't even associate the policy change from 1994, where there was nothing. Students were not actually assisted. So I'm just saying, for me, it's not a question of whether there's assistance. It's whether that assistance is linked to consciousness at TVETs and universities. The last point is this one of the media. It pains me to see people who call themselves comrades circulating fake news. They are not even conscious that they are circulating fake news. They argue sometimes half a day over a fake news. Now, it shows the level of sophistication of people opposed to the democratic project to a point that they can put the fake news among people who call themselves comrades, and those people then circulate that information among themselves and argue half a day around fake news until somebody intervenes and says it's fake news. The abandonment of the media space, because there's a lot of naivety about the role of the media in South Africa. That it's class neutral. Argue that from 1994 to now, the rules, even this 40%, which has there will actually be. But ultimately, we come in elections without organization, strong organization, politically, ideologically, and structurally.
Thank you so much, Comrade Hope Papo. Let's go to Comrade Tumelo Pizzo. Please just try to be as concise as you possibly can so that we can allow another round of questions after this particular one. And comrades who are joining us live on YouTube, they're also welcome to post their questions. I'll read them out. so that our guests can also respond to those. Comrade Pitso, the floor is yours.
Revolutionary greetings, comrades. What a very interesting topic indeed, a thought-provoking one. And this one, I think my reflection on the national election results is that one of the key issues that we should be addressing sooner than later is the voter education, because I think this will play a very important role in the understanding of voters in painting the scenario in the event that the national elections we don't score the way we would have loved to score, and they would understand that if there is no voter turnout, obviously we won't perform the way we would like to perform, and that will encourage them to go and vote, because they will understand what would happen if they are not going to vote. And I think one of the other issues that I want to raise is the renewal the renewal process that we embarked as the ANC, whereby one issue that would have made a big difference is the care among our comrades, because once we care for one another, there will be that synergy, there will be that reflection upon our constituency that these people they are united behind the banner of the ANC, and they want to see the ANC winning with outright majority. And if that is reflected, that would make a difference, and that would make us to have a scoreboard ticking in terms of the voter turnout. So the renewal process is one of the key things that we should be embarking on, because that will attract more people. And my last issue is the dialectics of materialism. I think this plays a very role in the voter turnout, because when we look at the people who are going to vote, you can see that those who are who have the favoritism in terms of or who are participating in the economy, they seem to be not care a lot in terms of going to vote. I don't know what makes that. What is the contributing factor in terms of the understanding? But I think that's my input. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Comrade Dumelo. Those were the questions. We will start with Comrade John, and then we'll go to Comrade Mantla. But before I bring in Comrade John, I just want to also pose one or two questions. The first one is that does the increased number of political parties participating in elections, including the independents, does that signify a maturity in our democracy or some form of a regression, especially when one considers the agenda that most of these popcorning parties represent, but also when one also considers the question of social cohesion and nation building? because I always ask myself, how do you begin to build a cohesive society when people have so many options? What needs to be done in order to sort of have a quota on the number of political parties that can participate? My own suggestion is that we need to really start having a legislated criteria on the formation of political parties, right? And even political representatives to say these are the requirements that one must meet in order for them to form a political party or to be declared a public representatives. And attached to that, there should be some level, some form of a quota, so that we don't have so many political parties, which in turn tend to affect our social cohesion and nation building agenda. And then secondly is to say, who does it benefit really when you have people buying out of democracy as a principle of rule, right? Because when you look at the fact that the people who did not vote outnumber those who voted, and really it may mean that they are actually buying out of the democratic project entirely. So who does that buying out really represent, right? So that, or who does it benefit? So that once we have that answer, we can understand what is the catalytic factor that leads to that decline in voter turnout, and by inference in this buying out of the democratic project, besides of course the other objective issues that have to do with people being disillusioned, people not seeing the real democratic dividend of this project that we've been engaged in since 1994. But clearly, if we were to do a thorough assessment, there are people who benefit from people not turning up to the votes. Who are those people and what do they represent, so that we can be able to understand the underlying catalytic factors that lead to that low voter turnout. So those would be my questions. And with that said, I'd like to bring in Dr. John Ostrick to respond to some of those questions.
Thanks, Comrade Chair. So I'm going to just respond to the comments from each of the people who spoke, where I've got anything relevant to respond to. So starting with Hope Papo's inputs, talking about street level work and that kind of thing. To my way of thinking, we've seen demonstrably that the voter turnout is low in lower income areas, and I already diagnosed that as a function of transport costs and the sense of whether or not you're going to benefit from voting at all. And what I've suggested is that because low-income citizens are not benefiting from the electoral process and from democracy in general, as you've just observed, Chair, it seems to me that they're not going to bother to engage in MDM activities anyway. So I think it's a waste of energy, personally. I think what we need to do is actually just deliver. And if we actually deliver, then they'll come to the voting station. If you're talking about doing door-to-door and trying to build a community in a high-income area, that doesn't work. High-income areas are ipso facto individualist. And this speaks to the sort of ethics of capitalism and the mentality of capitalism, which is that your successes are your crowning glory. And attributable to you. It's this kind of individualism that comes from the West. So I don't think that sort of approach works in suburban areas either. On the point that Hope raised about consciousness and beneficiaries at universities, electoral results at universities being low, and that we can't expect these people to come to elections generally. I would expect the opposite, because personally speaking, as somebody who spent probably more than 17 years in a university, I never bothered with SRC elections. And the reason was that I felt that I was sufficiently empowered, given my background privilege, to make my own case and fight my own battles. I didn't need to be represented. So I never bothered to vote in that case. But when it came to politics, I took it seriously because it affected the entire country, not just my, my studies or my, my student fees. So I don't think that the universities are necessarily the battleground that we need to look at either. For me, it's the last point that Hope raised, which a couple of other speakers also raised about fake news. For me, this is a current big interest of mine, and which I was mentioned in my bio. People are very uncritical of stuff they share. There seems to be a instinct on social media to share first and then question later in order to be getting lots of likes or approvals on social media to see how much your content gets responded to, how much your content gets shared based on you being the first one to share. So a lot of people have a quick trigger finger when they share content without critically analyzing it. And the rule of thumb I give people for fake news is simple. If it makes you scared, if it makes you angry, and if it seems a little bit far-fetched, then you should probably check if it's fake news before you share. But particularly anger and fear are the emotions to watch out for, because generally the news is quite bland. And, if you get an emotion of fear and anger from something, almost certainly it's fake news and it's designed to be shared by evoking fear and anger. So that's something to be aware of. On JJ's responses on individual issues versus organizational issues in relation to money, this seems to sound to me like trying to blame the individuals who were corrupt or who got involved in corrupt activities. And then he directed this also to the BEE beneficiaries. So you get guys that'll go and get a tender and they'll make lots of money. And he's saying that in both cases, you've got a person who's benefited from the existing system, and they're now not sharing that benefit with people down the line. I think that's right. I think that is a correct analysis, but I don't think it's the core issue of unemployment and job creation. I think the core issue here is that we've got a glut of low-skilled workers, which was created by the apartheid system deliberately to fund agriculture and mining. But now that we've got persistence of low-quality education, particularly in your rural areas, if you look at the sort of matric results, outside of the cities, and you look at the issue of, say, first language teaching versus mother tongue teaching versus second additional and so on. So I worked at DBE for 5 years, so I'm familiar with this problem. The issue is relating to the sort of skills that are ready for work, and our curriculum is still very biased towards academic subjects that aren't particularly useful for a world of work. So we spend a lot of time worrying about things like geography, or sorry for picking on geography. Let me think of something else. I don't know, history of European wars or something like that. And that's just not really relevant for the world of work directly. I mean, it's relevant for world politics, but not really beyond that. So I think we need to be paying much more attention to the education sector and what it's doing. So I, for one, am a big fan of micro-accreditations, but we can talk about that some other time. On the issue from Dinga Sigwebu, class structure and how the classes have spoken, my answer to that is very briefly, you can look at the demographic maps of the cities. You know what the cities look like, you know what the suburbs look like, you know what the townships look like, you know what the demographics are. So you can look at the electoral map and see how people voted based on that. So as I pointed out in my presentation, CBD Joburg seems to be EFF stronghold, and there's heavy unemployment there, and there's a lot of people from other countries living there as well. So I think your lowest income is the people supporting EFF. I don't know if a simplistic Marxist analysis or a naive Marxist analysis is worth doing here because of the large number of parties we've got, which is what Chair observed. And I'll get onto Chair's comments just now. There are much more nuances to class nowadays, and I've mentioned this to other comrades before. We're actually entering what I call neo-feudalism. Neo-feudalism speaks to how digital space, fake news, mass media are the objects of production. And the mode of production is those who create the media or respond to it. And the capitalist is now the neo-feudal landlord who owns those territories like Facebook or Twitter. And what you're doing by sharing this stuff is you're just creating engagement and hence advertising revenue for the neo-feudal landlords. You should opt out of these things, I think. That would be the best way. On the issue so Yolandi in the comment mentioned something about collaboration holding hands and speaking about the alliance. The comment was addressed to Prof. So I won't address that one. Tumelo Pizzo spoke about voter education. Yes, that is done by life orientation at schools. So there is a lot of civics type education at schools in the LO curriculum. Whether teachers actually teach it's another question. What I'm much more concerned about is why people wouldn't vote if they knew about voting. And I think that really just has to do with class, because we've seen the graphs that Prof presented, which confirmed my position, showing that your voter turnout is best in your higher income areas and worst in your lower income areas. And this suggests that it's really about the cost of transport, the amount of time you're wasting to make almost no difference to yourself. So the reason your high income areas will have a good voter turnout is because they're preserving capital and they're preserving their privilege, right? So because of the phenomenon of fearing, for example, the issue of Section 25, your majority privileged voters will go to the election posts and vote DA to make sure that their property is preserved. Whereas your landless majority who are struggling to make a living, A, don't want to waste the money on transport, and B, are not going to get land anytime soon because of the defeat of the 25 motion. So they don't see any point voting anyway. Plus there's a sewer leaking down the road and the ward councillor does nothing about it. So I think really the blame lies squarely on our feet. We need to actually action things. We need to actually deliver services. We need to actually create jobs. And perhaps some other time we can talk about how to create jobs, because it's not strictly the government's problem. It's also not strictly the capitalists' problem. Then on Chair's comments. So Chair raised quite a number of interesting comments, which I'll comment on. Number of increased parties. Does this signify maturity or regression? My opinion is it signifies regression. It looks to me like what's happening is that voters are doubling down on their individual identity or group identity. And I think Prof made this point as well. We see that PA took a huge portion of the colored vote. And clearly this is a demographic vote. On the request, the request of requirements to register a party, I think those requirements are strict enough. The thing is that we're getting more and more parties because ANC is no longer doing the broad church representation that it's supposed to do. In fact, it's of some concern that the ANC's demographics are non-representative of the country, in as much as the DAs are non-representative. So the DA is white dominated and the ANC is definitely black dominated, and this is reflected at the polls as well. So the question becomes one of what is the nature of the South African identity groups and how does each party speak to that identity group? So if you look at the previous election results, you'll see that where there's a colored area, you'll see that Good Party owns that area. And the other results are the same as they were this time around. So I think that people are literally just voting for their skin and whatever they think their skin is represented by. And that is very concerning, that apartheid is persisting mentally, that we still think along apartheid lines mentally. And even if people deny it, so like obviously because of my demographics, I get to hear what white people say amongst each other. And the comments generally use words like them, and it's very unfortunate. So there's this kind of us versus them mentality that persists in this country, and we need to think about that. On the issue of the many parties, unfortunately, what that does do is it does create a vote splitting scenario where you have so many parties to choose from that you reduce the support for the bigger parties. But on the other hand, you don't want an American scenario where you've got two parties and you've got to choose one of the two devils. And there's nothing that really meets your requirements. You don't want that scenario either. So I think probably a good ballpark would be 5 parties, putting aside the question of individual reps in Parliament. On the question of Who does it benefit when people bow out of democracy? Well, obviously it benefits the comprador bourgeoisie, and it benefits the colonialists of a special type. That's who it benefits. And obviously because they can afford to turn out at a voting station and because they know they're protecting their property, the more they turn out, the more they vote, and support the DA, the more their property is protected, the more the inequality persists. I mean, the only thing that's really changed since 1994, speaking as somebody who was an adult at the time, is that we don't have petty apartheid anymore, like stupid signs on park benches, but pretty much we still have apartheid. So those are the benefits, and obviously people aren't going to vote if they don't see any change, and they're not seeing change, not for the majority anyway, and that lies squarely at our feet as well. As for your comment, Chair, that the majority didn't show up to vote, that's not true. The majority of registered voters did show up. It was 59% of registered voters. The question is, why is the registered vote quite low? And who didn't bother to register to vote? And why did that other 41% not bother to show up, even though they registered? Those are my responses to the questions, but I would like to add 3 additional points, which have occurred to me listening to the commentation. The first point I want to talk about is gerrymandering. This is something quite predominant in the United States. So where historically there has been a slave-owning farm, for example, in the southern states of the USA, you would typically find that in the 60s that was a Democratic area, and then in the 70s after Nixon it switched to a Republican area. And what would happen is that the persons who were enslaved there, who would typically vote Democrat nowadays, their suburbs tend to be split up in such a way that they get reduced to minorities in every suburb. So each ward effectively cannot have a majority of basically African Americans voting. So this is how in the States they maintain power of the bourgeoisie, is they adjust the suburb boundaries to reflect demographic input and therefore the number of wards and the ward power. So for example, let's take Sandton as an example. If we look at, for example, let's say, let me think of a suburb. If we think of, say, what's it called, Marlborough. Marlborough is very heavily Indian demographic. Now that, as we can see from the graphs, would probably be 70% DA voting. Right next door to Marlborough is Alex. Alex is clearly going to be ANC voting. So why is that boundary drawn that way? If you want to actually get a more demographically balanced vote, you need to split the suburbs, and you need to draw the ward line through them rather than on the edges of them. So that's the gerrymandering aspect, and that needs to be thought about. The next thing I want to complain about is this thing of you have to vote in your ward. I think it's nonsense, and we need to change the IEC on this point. You should be able to vote anywhere. I mean, if I'm on holiday outside my ward, or if I'm on business outside my ward, the fact that I'm not in my ward shouldn't prevent me from voting for something, particularly for the national vote, where it's irrelevant what ward you're currently standing in. You shouldn't have to run back to your ward or get a special vote or a foreign vote or something like that. You should just be able to vote. If you're a citizen, you should be able to vote. Even for me, this thing of registering doesn't make sense. You should just show up with your ID document and vote. So those are my sort of general feelings about those. And then lastly, the comment on representatives in public office and the legal processes involved. To me, it seems to me that we should actually require CVs. It seems to me that in politics, it's the only job we don't require a CV. I mean, if we look at our current Minister of Agriculture, the man has a matric. In what way is he qualified to run a ministry, let alone one on agriculture? What does the man even know about agriculture? Why are we seeing Comrade Motshekga move to, I don't know, defense or wherever she's been moved, out of education when her qualification is in fact education? So these kind of issues are issues that I find problematic and cause problems in our country.
Thank you so much, Dr. John, for that illustrious response. And thank you for correcting me to say, actually, I should have said the number of people who turned out to the polls is greater than those that who did not turn out. But unfortunately, 41% is still a high number for immunity triggered. Prof, the floor is yours. You can respond to any of the questions and comments that we posed.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you very, very much to the comrades for all the questions and the inputs. I'll just deal with broader themes. The first theme on job creation, the fact of the matter is that this for me requires a separate discussion to deal with the role of domestic capital as well as international capital if we are to seriously deal with the issue of job creation in South Africa and the stagnant economy. So there's certainly a debate for another day. I think the question that Comrade Dinga raises on race and language as a voting patterns and therefore the class structure of society. I think that one of the things that demonstrate that these voting patterns, in my view, they fundamentally demonstrate a class structure of our society. If you look at the voter turnout in white areas or suburbs versus voter turnout in working class communities, rural and urban. It's a function of class because in the suburbs, you could literally walk into a voting station at 6. It's still safe to do so. But in rural areas or in the township, it's very different. It's a different story to think that you can vote late at 7, at 9 in Diepsloot. There are many factors that you must take into account if you want to do that. But also linked to that is the issue of voting being is it a non-trading day or a trading day? Can't remember one of the two. But you've got a number of working class people who are compelled for obvious reasons to go and work on the day of the voting, and then those people sometimes, to Comrade John's point, they are told that you are not registered here, so you can't vote. So these are all the issues and the factors that are a reflection of a class structure of society already. There used to be a COSATU survey, and I think we may benefit from just doing those surveys, COSATU, SAFTU, whatever you want to do. On the COSATU survey used to focus on workers and political attitude, and it used to reveal a lot of fascinating factors. And I think, Comrade Dinga, these are some of the things that perhaps we may want to think about. But the fact of the matter, it is very clear, in my view, if you just look at the patterns in the areas, the formerly white areas, where the middle strata is located, they sort of give you a sense of how the middle strata is working, or what JZ used to call the clever blacks. Or if you listen to their views, the 702 blacks, that's what they're also called. I mean, I know those are problematic terms, but if you listen to their views there, you begin to get a sense of the voters' patterns. But definitely, I think there is a case to delineate this voting, primarily taking class over and above race and language. I'm going to come to this point later on when I want to deal with the point of ethno-nationalism. Comrade Hope observation on the voter turnout on student is very important. But I think it goes back to the question which I presented in one of the solutions of building strong organizations at grassroots level, and that's why you then conscientize the masses. We used to argue in our days that we are members of the society before we were students, precisely because we understood that our activism did not end on campus. And so for me, if there is a tendency or a new behavior where there is activism that ends on campus and is not extended beyond issues that affects you as a member of society, it becomes a problem. And the question of misinformation and disinformation speaks to the ownership structure of the media. The funding model of the media is very important too. I mean, if you look at these social media companies, for example, how are they regulated in our environment? I mean, they will tell you that they've got content moderators and all that nonsense that does not help you deal with serious problems. So there are different rules in different area settings. If you are in Ireland, Facebook will have different rules than when you are in Ethiopia, for example. That is why many African countries will resort to internet shutdown when they try to deal with serious, complex issues. I mean, they throttled the internet recently in Kenya. When there were riots. It's precisely because of this question of regulation of these companies that are found on the internet. The battle of ideas is a very important discussion, and maybe Comrade Kifenze is one of the topic that we must talk about. Really think about discussing. I mean, I try to debate it in my head. Why would I mean, I understand the government of national unity, so it is what it is. But I mean, the department DT as a department with 19 radio stations, most of them in African languages, national television. These are, and suddenly there's a discourse of privatizing SABC. And these are some of the issues that we have to understand, that there is no revolution widely solved that cannot control the means or the battle of ideas as a minimum platform for it to advance this revolution. So in our context, where we are reliant on a commercialized medium that basically are controlled by the capitalists. So that's it's something that we must really debate. I think Comrade Tumelo raises quite a number of observations which I largely agree. And I think the renewal process, in my view, speaks to our need to really think about the organizational redesign. Because I think it's Comrade Hope is raising the point that you cannot think that you can use the model of organizing that you used when you were launching the Freedom Charter in 1955 in 2024. That is not going to happen. So how you redesign and reorganize yourself in the context of the challenges, contemporary challenges that are facing the movement, otherwise you will be history. And lastly, I think the point that Chair, you are raising, it's a very important point, but I think in my view is twofold. I hope I'm not leaving anything out. In my view is twofold. The first part pertains to the fact that the plurality of voices is a demonstration of maturity. If you think about it, that you've got I mean, there's a former comrade of mine who was contesting as an independent candidate. She was using a step ladder, putting all the posters everywhere, And for me, that you've got a democracy that enables that to happen is something that to be celebrated. We have to celebrate that as a serious maturity of our democracy, because those of us who campaigned in the first elections in 1994, particularly here in the PWV region, will remember that there was a time where there are areas where you couldn't go with campaign. There were no-go zone areas. So that we have reached a stage where 70 parties can sort of launch is in a sense is immature. But whether there is regression, and I agree with Comrade John, is that it would have been better if these parties were arising on a platform, maybe, the parties will rise on a platform of an environment. That will be understandable. But most of these parties rise on ethnic basis or narrow nationalist basis. And that's why the problem arises. UDM is voted in the Eastern Cape by Xhosa-speaking people. Good is voted by colored people. AIC, the party that used to steal elections, votes from the ANC because of the logo and the name, will largely be voted by people in a particular region. IFP will be voted by Zulus. Now we see MKP, people who will argue, but I can tell you that MKP is voted largely by Zulu-speaking people. Action SA will overtly campaign on xenophobic messages, PA. So that's what the problem is, that these parties are rising on very problematic politics, which is something that we will have to engage as a form of serious regression. 42% of people who did not go to, okay, let's say over 40 people of people who did not vote. If these people had formed their own parties, they would be the biggest party in South Africa, if you think about it. But this, in my view, I always put things into proper perspective in their proper context, that we're not the only country that is grappling with this reality of disengagement and loss of interest in public representation, because who cares what is going to change? Of course, in our context, it's very different, because it means a lot to have a party that is going to advance particular policies that we think can help us. If you look at the recent elections in the UK, they had the lowest voter turnout in many years, at 50%, if I'm not mistaken. France, the recent elections, they were also sitting at 59%, which is not that big. India was sitting at 62%. So we there or thereabout. There is a view by the electorates or a distrust that the electorates are placing on democracy, or how they be beginning to perceive and interpret democracy. I think I'm told there was a question that Yolanda posed on the group chat. I'm trying to look for it, Chair. If you could help me, if you have it. I didn't see it. I was not checking the chat, so I'm struggling. I'm trying to scroll up. There are many questions. Okay, here's a question. Further engagement structures. We need the Alliance and MDN together with the ANC to put ANC back into its position of being the leader of society. Okay, I hear you, Comrade Yolanda. And I think that the point you are raising is the role of the Alliance. But it seems to me, someone was saying to me, there's a comrade who was saying to me, remember, you're going to speak to there's a new alliance of ANC, DA, and IFP, or something like that, or like that. So the role of the alliance is informed by the minimum program as articulated in the NDR, and of course, it does not mean, and the ANC does not have a right. I always say this point, to lead the NDR. There was a time in history where the ANC was not the leader of the National Democratic Revolution in South Africa, where the ANC was a moribund, weak organization. But of course, if you look at, for example, the Communist Party, if you look at the 1928 Black Republic thesis, which essentially gives rise to the alliance as we know it today, it clearly articulates the role of the Communist Party in building what was then called the bourgeois nationalist movement, the ANC, as a basis upon which you could advance a socialist struggle. And therefore, from now putting on my head as a communist, I think that there is still a value in building the alliance, because in our context, to advance socialism, you will have to do it on the basis of the National Democratic Revolution in the terrain. Of course, there are many terrains that are offered to us. Therefore, building the alliance is not just for elections, in my view. It's about dealing with societal issues that we are faced with. We've got too many child or single-headed households, child-headed household, and that's where the structure, the social fiber of our societies gets broken. So in the absence of an organization and community that is able to mobilize and galvanize community, and that's where the alliance comes in. So as a communities, organized workers, you then are unable to deal with those societies, not just for elections, but for ensuring that you build a society that you want to see. So there will always be value and room for alliance, and this alliance must be strengthened. But how it's going to be reconfigured with the GNU, that's the debate for another day. Let me pause here, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Comrade Mandla, Dr. Joel. I apologize for the echo, comrades. I'm actually moving around, so I thought I could get away with this, multitasking without being caught. But it seems like whatever background sound sold me out this time around. But thank you for those comments. I think you've given us a lot to nibble on, and definitely, Prof, will have to consider that particular discussion around the battle of ideas, because I think it's a very important discussion to have. It's a very important discussion to have, to say how do we take control of the communication machinery within the country, but beyond that, how do we ensure that progressive ideas that are for our revolution are able to find a solid expression, And I think attached to that, Prof, is the question of what kind of psychology should these ideas enforce in society? Because one gets worried that seemingly we have not done a great job in terms of the psychological orientation, particularly of the motive forces, to say, while we engage in this revolution, how are they expected to conduct themselves? One, to the revolution, two, to themselves, but thirdly, to each other and the rest of society. Because I think it's very important. I mean, if you were to take, for example, what President Julius Kambarene did with the concept of Ujamaa, and being able to build that concept as a psychological, therefore becoming a way of life. And I think it's something that we need to labor on. It's something that we need to speak about, so such that even as we win in that battle of ideas, we're able to infuse a particular psychology in society that should inform how we should conduct ourselves, particularly as the motive forces. But secondly, Prof, I thought throughout you were speaking as a communist. So when you said, let me wear my communist hat, I got a bit shocked because throughout I thought that you were wearing that particular hat. But thank you so much, comrades, for your inputs. What I will do is that I will give each one of you about 2 to 3 minutes to give us your closing remarks, so that we can be able to end on time. And I'll start with you, Prof, and then we'll end off with Comrade John Ostrick.
Chair, thank you very much for the opportunity you are giving me to reflect on what has been raised. I think this has been a very useful and engaging debate, and some of the issues that have been raised here are going to help us to concretize the work that Liza Hill had in repositioning and building the organization. Let me just raise 2 quick points in my closing remarks. The first point is that the question of jobs and the question of the economy is a very important issue that you cannot rule out when you are analyzing these elections. Now, there are many views of why we are where we are today. I know that Comrade Dinga was here, penned a very interesting article the other day in the Sunday paper where he advanced the notion of a stalemate, which of course has elicited a number of debate and discussions. The fact of the matter is that the ANC or any governing party or any party in government that is existing in a capitalist-dominated society cannot create an environment to create jobs without having to engage with capital. Now, where I buy the argument that is advanced by Comrade Ding of the stalemate is that whatever ideological angle you come from, the fact of the matter is that we have been having a stagnant economy for a very long time. And for us to deal with the question of jobs, we will have to fundamentally address the question of growing the economy, because it is on the basis of that then you can have the debate and discussions on the productive forces. Again, maybe hint, maybe another topic that you might want to really think about, Comrade Chair. The last point that I wish to emphasize as a way forward is that, it's easier to want to blame people for elections outcomes. But unfortunately, you'll have to come back, just like a force of gravity, come back to the ground and deal with the fact that without strong organization that are established and occupy all critical section of society, you are not going to be able to have hegemony in society and therefore become that leader of society. If we've got structures that are just designed to do two things, take you to conferences and help you to nominate for the list process, but structures that are unable to concretely engage in the popular struggles of the people on daily basis, struggles of electricity, struggles of water, struggles of tariffs that we are faced with in Johannesburg, and all those sort of issues, you are not going to be able to turn around the situation. So the question of how do we reposition and build strong organization, in my view, remains the very, very important question. Those are the 2 points, Chair, that I thought I should raise as my parting shots to you. But thank you very much for the invite. I really appreciate the opportunity. And thanks to all the comrades that have participated and make very, very interesting inputs.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prof. Mandla, for your presence. And you're most welcome. It was a great pleasure having you here. I hope my echo is a bit better now. I suspect my headphones were the problem. But Comrade John, you're welcome to give us your closing remarks.
Comrades, I think I don't want to take up too much time here. So I'm not going to rehash what I said, except to just say that these election results seem to me to be a function of, as I said, the low turnout, but also our own failures. So for me, it's more important that we look at how we can deliver. I once rebuked a comrade who said to me some phrase like, what can we do to ensure that the party stays in power? And the party must stay in power. And I said to him, no, the party must stay in power if the party delivers for the people. If the party fails to deliver for the people, then the party must be removed from power. Because we're here to serve the people. We're not here to just stay in power for power's sake. If we are the wrong party and we're not delivering, then that is our problem, and we need to sort that out. So my closing remark would be, we need to look internally, and we need to look at what are the issues with delivery and why are we not delivering. I've got some ideas on this which relate to the very structure of our government. And it's the one case that comes to mind very often is when people in my own ward, which is DA dominated, will point to a pothole in the road and say, yeah, you see, look how the ANC doesn't run things properly. And then I'll always remind them, by the way, this is a DA ward. So how is this the ANC's problem? And they don't seem to understand the structure of government. So I think one of the things we need to do is clarify to people what the ANC is responsible for, what it's not responsible for. When we say the ANC is in power, what do we mean by that? When we say the ANC is the government, what do we mean by that? Because a lot of people think that, if you're in a DA-controlled ward or city or whatever, that somehow it's still the ANC's problem if there are problems. And I don't think it's nearly that simplistic. The other thing I'll point out to people is that your your functionaries who work in government, and this is why we talk about professionalization of the civil service. Those functionaries may or may not be delivering for whatever reason, but I don't think their reasons are political. I think generally their reasons have to do with job satisfaction. So I think, again, as the party, we should be looking at not reducing cadre deployment, but increasing it by making sure that our functionaries are deployed, by making sure that our officials who are supposed to be delivering service in the name of the ANC are in fact delivering, because I don't think they are. And those are things to think about as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. John Ostrich, for those closing remarks. Let me once again extend our gratitude as the school to both Prof. Mandla Radebe as well as Dr. John Ostrich for really taking time out of your busy schedules to prepare the presentations that you have given us and sharing them with us today. You have really given us a lot to think about. And I think the key takeaways here is that indeed this electoral outcome presents a historic moment in the course of our democracy. But secondly, it poses a mirror of reflection on the organization itself and maybe the entire movement, the entire mass democratic movement, to say where have we gone wrong and what are the things that we need to begin interrogating and fixing within ourselves and how we operate. And I think the other key point to take away is that we need to build a stronger organization that is able to serve the people in the real sense. And the indicator of that will be a real transformation in people's lives and ensuring that people are able to feel the impact of this democratic project in their daily lives. And thank you so much to everyone who took time to be with us today, for the comments, for the questions, as well as the engagement that was happening within the chat group, as well as those who joined us on YouTube. We truly, truly appreciate it. We try by all means as the OR Tambo School of Leadership to also create a platform where comrades can meet every Sunday to discuss whatever issue of national importance and of significance to our revolution, so that we can begin also influencing public discourse with the right content, but also engaging in the battle of ideas armed with content and substance. So please, every Sunday, do join us. We're going to have these sessions every Sunday between 12 and 2. The next week, we're probably going to look at the global balance of forces, considering the number of elections that have been taking place and some of the political shifts that have been happening, in order to have a clear understanding of what do those balance of forces tell us and how do we begin to reposition ourselves in order to seize the opportunities that are presented by those shifts and those power dynamics that are playing out. So we invite you to tell comrades that the OR Tambo School of Leadership Public Dialogues is a platform to be for umkhabulo, is a platform to be if you want to be informed. So thank you so much, comrades, for joining us. Be on the lookout on all our social media platforms in terms of communiques about our different initiatives, including the topics and the guests that we'll be having next week. Until then, we'll see you next time on the same platform. And please do share whatever posters that we share on our social media platforms. Thank you so much and have a great week ahead. Let's be productive. Those who are in the public service, let us go and serve our people. Those who are in structures, let us go and strengthen those particular structures.